Hello and welcome to Chapter 2. So Chapter 2, we're going to talk about frameworks for leading the process of organizational change. So this is how to go about the organizational change. We're going to look at again, this chapter focuses on how to make change. We're going to look at 6 process-oriented models of planned, purposeful change. So 6 different ways to go about making these changes. If we had just one way to change it, it would be a very short book. We could read it in a couple days and then talk about it some and write a paper and go home, but that's not the way it works. So we're dealing with lots of different styles of organization, different styles of people, different cultures and things. So it takes different approaches to be successful. So we're going to learn different types of process-oriented models, and then you'll have different tools in your toolbox, and hopefully you have better luck at picking the right tool to make the change you want. And so again, later we're going to talk about what needs to change, but right now we're going to talk about how to make changes. And the first model we're going to look at is the sigmoid curve, right? So the sigmoid curve is this first green line. It's meant to represent the life of an individual, an organism, or even an organization. So over time down here on the bottom, you'll see the outcomes are you're struggling at first, but then you get better, then you're doing really well, and eventually the organization starts to age or get complex or sort of turn in on itself. Things slow down, the outcomes don't get any better, and eventually the outcomes start getting worse and worse, right? So if this is the natural nature of things, what are you going to do? Well, the answer is you start a new curve, right? So you make some changes, you start a new curve, and you get launched on this process again, right? Think of Steve Jobs coming back to Apple for the second time around, and Apple sort of reasserting itself and taking off for greatness a second time around. So that's the sigmoid curve, and sometimes we're going to refer to that in terms of how things change over time. So unfortunately, straight lines of success just don't keep going. Right? I can't even think of one single example where that's been the case. Right? Lewin's had a really simple view of this, right? We got things are the way they are, processes in the organization, and they're frozen, right? So the first thing we need to do is unfreeze them, right? And then after we unfreeze them, so we're going to break the mold, then we're going to make our changes and get people convinced this is the right way to do, and then we're going to refreeze. Right. The problem I always have is with the refreeze is we're going to lock these in as the way we work. Be careful. Freeze them, but don't cement them, because according to the sigmoid curve, you're going to be right back here at the unfreeze stage at some point in the future. So the new way will become the old way, will become the frozen way, and then you're going to have to unfreeze it. So be careful about how permanent you make this new great way of doing things, because those of us who have been around a while understand that, yeah, you're gonna make it better, and you're gonna think that's the new way, but sometimes the new way becomes the old way, and then you're gonna right back at it again. So be careful about the freeze part, because you're gonna end up unfreezing it again. So this is a very, very simple model, but it does highlight the fact that you need to unfreeze the old part before you can make changes. You can't put changes on top of an existing frozen model of how to do things, right? Kind of expanding on the same theme is Kotter's 8-stage process. Now, Kotter is a Harvard business professor, wrote a lot of books about organizational change. I like it because it's fairly simple model, and it's fairly self-explanatory. But if you ever get a chance to read one of his books, they're what I refer to as business airplane books. It takes 2-3 hours to get through the book, and maybe if it's a bigger one, or you kind of go slower, if it's a 3-hour flight from the East Coast to the West Coast, if you can't read it on the way there, you can certainly read it on the way there and then on the way back. And that's kind of what they're designed for, to tell you the truth. So they generally have 1 or 2 really big thoughts that are important to learn, and then they spend the rest of the book explaining it and expounding upon it and giving examples of it. But that's okay. If you can get 1 or 2 strong takeaways from any business book, imagine every time you read a book, you learn something important. You keep reading books, you're going to learn lots of important things, and at some point, you can't help but make some use out of them. So in Kotter's 8-stage model, the first stage I highlighted here because it is by far the most important. It says, first, establish a sense of urgency, right? So the point is, don't just jump in and start making changes. You've got to modify the environment, and especially the people in the environment, to get them ready for change, right? When a team shows up to a stadium for a game, they don't jump off the bus and run out in the field their uniform and they're ready to go, right? They have warm-ups, and the coach talks to them about strategy and all this kind of thing. So it's the same kind of thing with change. First of all, you've got to motivate people to change, and by far and away, this is the most common mistake. Management has been studying the problem. Management has lots of information about this issue. Management understands the need for change. So they dictate this change to the troops out in the organization, and they don't understand why the troops don't take this very seriously as the important issue it is. And it's because management understands the need for this change. They just didn't bother to tell or convince those people that need to make the change. So at the heart of it all, it's not the workers' fault, it's management's fault. So Kotter stresses over and over and over again, you need to establish a sense of urgency in those who must make the change. Until you do that, they're not ready to listen. They're not ready to make the change. You're just wasting your breath. All else is wasted until you do this first step. Right, so you must convince them, however you need to do that, however long it takes, that there is this urgent need of change. Right? Then, and only then, right, can you go to step 2. So step 2 is guiding a coalition where you get together a group of leaders, and they're going to lead this sort of like a committee and decide what to do and how to study the problem, what needs to be done, which takes them to step 3, which is they're going to develop a vision and a strategy how to deal with the situation, whether it's reactive or proactive. And then step 4, communicate this change of vision to everyone else. And then step 5, they're going to empower employees to jump in with them and help make these changes, including they're going to let people make decisions and let people do their own implementation plans and so forth. And then part of human nature is number 6, you want to generate short-term wins, because there's going to be a lot of people on the fence watching. Is this going to be a flavor of the month that's going to go away soon, or is this the real deal? Is this something that's going to be happening for a long time around here, right? Is this going to become the way we do things? So they're watching and waiting. They're letting the early adapters jump in there, but they're watching and kind of keeping an eye out to see how things go. When they see short-term wins and people getting rewarded for those short-term wins, they're much more likely to jump in and go, oh, this is something management values. Management values it so much they're actually giving rewards for it. Therefore, I like rewards. I'll jump in and help. Whether I believe in this thing or not, who cares? It apparently it's important to our upper management, therefore it must be important, or at least it's important to me in terms of getting rewards, so I'm going to jump on board. Then as you get people to start to jump on board and doing more and more things for this, you want to consolidate the gains, number 7. So you want to make these new ways of working the current way of working. You want to start doing process changes and all of that, and that takes us to step 8. We're going to anchor this, right? So this is sort of the freeze state we saw from the Lewin model. So we're going to make the new way the current way, the way of doing things, and we're going to keep it there until, of course, it becomes time for, you guessed it, unfreeze, and we go on to the next thing, whatever the next thing might happen to be. All right, so the next model we're going to look at is Gentiles' voice to give, giving voice to values, right? Which we want to clarify and articulate one's values, and certainly change leaders will tell you it's important to restate the vision of this change over and over and over again, right? We have this post-decision making analysis and implementation, so we can't just make decisions and go. We've got to pay attention. We've got to look at things. We've got to analyze things, right? And then we got to look at speaking to one's values, why we're doing this, how this is in line with our values, and then get feedback from our peers, right? How are things going? Are we doing okay? You can't just do it with your eyes closed and your ears closed, right? You got to pay attention to what's going on for those around you, and how are they reacting to this change, to this information, and so forth. Right. Another process model this is a sort of really early one is Duck's 5-stage change curve. Where first there's stagnation. This is the way we're doing things. We're kind of stuck in a rut. We're doing things the same way, right? Then we realize there's need for change, and then we start this preparation, kind of like Kotter with this establishing a sense of urgency. So this preparing for a change, as opposed to jumping right to the implementation, which I've just said a couple times, doesn't really work very well. So after we prepare people for change, then we start implementing the change, right? And then there's this determination of how things are working. Are we there or not? And it all falls together in fruition, right? So this is a little more simplicity of what later became Kotter's model. All right, the Beckert and Harris change process model. You look at this as, let's start at the top here, initial organizational analysis. So this is where we determine we have something has changed, and do we need to react to it, which takes us to the second block. We're going to determine the need for change, to determine the degree of choice about whether to change, and define this new vision. So are we changing? What are we going to do about it? Right, which takes us to, which takes us to gap analysis, which is very simply describe the present state. Where are we now? And over here, defining the desired future state. Where do we want to be? Where are we now? Where we want to be? What's the difference? That would be the gap, right? So this gap analysis is simply that. It says, okay, We have a gap. We're not where we want to be. So what's the next question we should be asking ourselves? Action plan assessing in the present in terms of the future to determine the work to be done. So how do we close the gap in a nutshell, right? What needs to be done to close the gap? What are we going to do? What's the action plan for making that happen? And then we got to manage that as we move from the present state to the desired future state. We got to manage that transition, right? So this doesn't give you a lot of definition on how to manage that. We'll have some more things in here later on how one might do that. Another process model is, well, this is sort of, actually this is the outline of the book. This is the chapter 4 is this awakening, right? So this recognition that things have to change, or this establishing the sense of urgency. Then mobilization, now we're marshaling our resources, we're doing our planning, we're starting to make things happen. Acceleration, now we're getting up the curve, things are happening much quicker. Institutionalize, right, that's where we start freezing things in place, right, making it stick, so to speak, and from there we're gonna make it, you know, the frozen way, I guess would be the way to put it, of doing things. Right. So we look at these components of these different models. There's this awakening of why changing, right? Getting people to wake up, getting people to understand. Then this mobilization, this gap analysis. Okay, this is the future desired state, and here we are now. So what are we going to do? The acceleration is getting from there to here. All right, all the action planning and so forth that needs to go into that, and then the institutionalization. We're going to monitor how the changes are going. We're going to teach others to follow those changes. We're going to make those the standard processes and so forth, right? All part of making the change stick, right? We don't want to slide back on our old ways of doing things when the heat is off, because that's a very much of a temptation, and certainly has happened to a lot of organizations, right? So in summary, right, we need to differentiate between what needs to change and how to change. This chapter was about how to change, and we've looked at a number of processes of how we'll go about changing these processes. So this wraps up chapter 2. I'll see you in a little bit on chapter 3.